folks. Welcome to the Garage Door. I'm your host, Craig Owens. And with me tonight, I am so lucky. I have the Hollywood All-Stars, Steve Gaspar, with us. Steve,
Hey,
thanks for
Craig.
being here.
Thank you, Craig. Yeah, I want to thank you guys for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, we
Uh,
appreciate you.
I am a big fan of your station. I want you to know that ahead of time.
Oh, awesome.
It means a lot to be able to talk to you, Craig.
Well,
So
that's
thank you.
great. We appreciate you listening. We'll take all the listeners we can get.
I hear you.
So let's talk about the Hollywood All-Stars, though.
Well, you know what, Craig? The Hollywood All-Stars is a passion project of mine. I mean, I have played with, a lot of different artists, many of whom some people may have heard of: James Brown, B.B. King, Edgar Winter, Peter Criss from Kiss, Gene Cornish from the Rascals. And at one point in my career, decided I wanted to put my own thing together. And I started calling in a bunch of favors from musicians that I had either toured with or shared the recording studio with. And, one by one, they started saying, "This sounds like a really cool deal. We'd love to jump on board." And I never imagined that, years later, I'd be here talking to you, telling you I have the singer from Tower of Power, the drummer from the Blues Brothers band, the bass player from the Edgar Winter band, the horn section from the Rolling Stones Steel Wheels tour. I mean, it's morphed into this really big, powerful supergroup, and I couldn't be happier or more proud to be able to, write and record for this band.
Right. And that when you say super group, that is a super group. Like,
Yeah, everyone comes with some pretty heavy credentials
yeah,
and some serious talent. But you know what, Craig? Above all of that, a bunch of really, really nice people, which with 13-piece band, it's important we all get along. You know what I
right.
mean?
So are these all guys that you knew beforehand, or some of them were, you know?
Yeah, you know what? For the most part, we had all crossed paths. I mean, a couple of us go back to our infancy when we were teenagers. The bass player and I, Scott Spray, have gosh, we were working together probably from the time we had driver's
Oh,
licenses. And,
wow.
a lot of the other ones I'd met on the road. The horn section I ran into just probably about 8 years ago. The Uptown Horns were notorious around the East Coast for having played with, as I mentioned, the Rolling Stones, but also the Jay Giles Band.
Right.
They ended up being the horn section that played on James Brown's Grammy Award winning song Living in America.
Oh, wow.
And, I went and approached them, and they had also decided it sounded like a very fun project. And, I'm very honored to have them on board and be part of it.
That is, it's amazing. That
Yeah, it really is. I'm truly blessed to be able to
and I would
call
assume there are
up.
hundreds of years of practice going on between the group.
Oh, for sure.
You
For
know.
sure. Yeah, you know what? Cumulatively,
Yeah.
you're right.
Oh, yeah. So you mentioned that you performed with James Brown, B.B. King, Edgar Winter. Were were your influences blues growing up, or what were you, soul music? What were you into?
Well, it's funny. I started on piano. Actually at 4 and a half. My father was a concert musician, a classical musician. His instrument was trombone, and played with the Chicago Symphony, the Dallas Symphony, and then eventually, when they settled on the East Coast, played with the New Haven Symphony Orchestra, the Bridgeport Symphony. So when I was 4 and a half, Dad decided that I was going to take piano lessons. And at 4 and a half, you don't know how to even argue with someone. So I did what I was told. And I have to tell you, Craig, I have thanked him more times than I could recount for having started me that young. But to answer your question, I was classically influenced from the time I was four, probably till maybe 11 or 12. And then there was that fateful evening that the Beatles appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show. And like so many other musicians that I've talked to, my world changed at that moment. And
Sure.
that's when the whole pop thing started for me.
Okay. So after the Beatles, then that's kind of what opened you up to.
Yes, you know what? It's funny. I went to my father and I said, Dad, listen, I really, really love this kind of music. And you have to remember, at that point, there really weren't a lot of keyboards in rock and roll. I mean, yeah, there was Jerry Lee Lewis and, a couple of people that played piano. But in terms of bands, the Beatles, there weren't keyboards.
Sure.
So I actually started, in addition to my classical piano lessons, I started taking electric bass guitar lessons.
Okay.
Couple of years after playing bass, now the Doors come onto the scene, the Animals come onto the scene, and all of a sudden, the Rascals, there are all these organs in pop music. And that's when I dropped the bass guitar and went back to my roots, which were keyboards, and went and started playing Hammond organ.
Well, we're glad you did.
Well, thank you very much. I still love it. You know what, Craig? The sound of that instrument is still something. I mean, piano and organ are really my go-tos. I love them both dearly. Synthesizers I love, but I don't feel I ever was really a super proficient synthesizer player. Piano and organ have always been the two keyboards that really speak to me.
Well, the organ for me, there's so many different genres of music. The organ is good to listen to, and so
Yeah, I mean the sound of that instrument is really something very special.
and it brings a different tone to all kinds of different kinds of music too. So
Absolutely, absolutely.
and the getting back to the band though, it's a 13-piece band.
Yeah, it's a big group.
Now, are you guys out touring or?
Well, as you can imagine, booking a 13-piece
Right.
band.
That was my question. You're not playing a small stage anywhere.
No, no. And I mean, number one, you have to think, where can we fit? We have been basically concentrating on theaters all up and down the East Coast.
Okay.
We're pretty much East Coast situated for the time being, from southern New Jersey all the way up to Danbury, Connecticut. So in that realm, we do play New Jersey, Long Island, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts. But, we get asked sometimes to go and do these short tours. One of the songs from our record, the title is called Field of Grace, was being played in the Midwest. And our agent called me one day and said, Steve, I got a call from, this theater. They're having a big festival and the song's being played on the radio out there and they'd like you guys to come and headline this festival. And I said, great, it sounds good. So he says, all right, let me put a pencil to paper and I'll get back to you in a little while. So Craig, the funny part is about 10 minutes later, he calls me back and he says, you did say 13 pieces, right? And I said, yeah. And he said, Steve, I started putting ground transportation together, airline tickets, hotel. He goes, can't you cut the band down to like 5 or 6? And you know what, Craig, that's not what the Hollywood All-Stars is. I don't want to go out without the horn section.
Sure.
I don't want to go out without the background vocalist.
Well, we'll be the same.
I present this as something very special, and it is something that people often don't get a chance to see.
Right.
To hear something, the sound that big with a real horn section, a real Hammond organ, and all of this stuff. So to answer your question, yes, we are playing. But the ironic thing is, we're actually now getting more radio airplay than we are doing actual touring.
Yeah.
And I find that I have the opposite problem of many of my contemporaries, where they're out doing gigs 5, 6, 7 nights a week, dying to get on the radio.
Yeah.
And here I am on the radio, but I can't get a gig. So it's sort of, I guess it's, but it's something that is very special when we do it. And I haven't given up on the fact that, we certainly will be booking more shows for sure.
Great. But I assume the East Coast, there's plenty of theaters to play up.
Yeah, there are. There are. I mean, you know what? I mean, from the point of having original material now and having a record out, I really am dying to try to expand our area so that more people could become familiar with us. I mean, the radio does do a lot, but the bottom line is people want to come and see the band.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't need to tell you how radio has changed.
Right. Oh, I know.
So it's a tough battle.
You guys live just blows the doors off the place.
Well, you know what? And again, I'm not going to take all the credit for that. With the caliber of musicians in this band who have toured with everyone, yeah, it is something very, very powerful when you do come and see it.
Well, you were talking about the new EP, Field of Grace. It's out on Deco Entertainment, correct?
Yeah, yeah, and that was a funny story. I mean, this all happened really toward the middle to end of COVID, when no one was out gigging and nobody was working. And of course, I decided that if I wanted to take this band to the next level, it really meant having to write for it. And being a Grammy nominated songwriter, I decided I was going to focus all my energy into this project, and that's when I wrote the EP. Had finished the masters, hadn't even really begun to shop the record yet. I was almost at the point where I thought I'm going to do the whole CD baby route and press my own CDs and
Right.
sell them out of my trunk at our shows and do that whole
Sure.
thing. And a friend of mine, a very good guy, Steve Luongo, said to me, Steve, Steve is that's a whole nother story. He co-wrote before John Entwistle from The Who passed. He was working with John Entwistle.
Oh, wow.
And they had a lot of songs in John Entwistle's catalog, which Steve ended up getting signed to Decca.
Oh, wow.
So said to me, "Why? This stuff is amazing. You ought to send it to these guys." And long story short, Craig, they took one listen to it, and the band was signed 3 months later.
That's great. That is,
So, and they've really grown into a very nice boutique label now. They included in their roster, they're putting out a Halloween project by Slash from Guns N' Roses.
okay.
They just signed Brian Setzer from the Stray Cats.
Wow.
They also have Tiffany, the female pop star from the 80s. So it's a real diverse, eclectic mix
Sure.
of music. But they've given us a very nice home, and it's nice to have, it feels like a team. I'm not doing it all by myself.
That's great. And all the help you can get, right?
Yeah. Well, you know it. You know it for sure. I mean, you know what? There's no shortage of talent out there, and there's such a glut of content. And I'm sure you guys too must get inundated with music all day long.
Absolutely.
And it's just very difficult for anything to really rise to a level where,
Sure.
unless you're Taylor Swift, you have to feel lucky to be out there and be able to even do a gig.
And you guys kind of took off quick with it, right? I mean, when did
Yeah, you know what? We were very lucky. I mean, radio took to us. And I think a lot of that is because there isn't a lot of stuff like this now.
Right.
I mean, with all the music and a lot of, programmers and DJs have said to me, with all the stuff we get inundated with, it's a lot of singer-songwriters. It's a lot of smaller 4 or 5 piece rock bands, which listen, I love them. They're great. I'm not saying anything disparaging about that. But I bet we could count on one hand the number of big 13-piece rock and horn bands you guys get.
Right.
Unless you're Southside Johnny or Bruce Springsteen. How many of us are there,
Right. And it's funny because it's kind of come full circle. 40, 50 years ago, there was a lot of big bands like that touring around. And
Absolutely, yes.
I'm glad you guys are bringing it back.
Well, you know what? I mean, as corny as it may sound, I do feel a responsibility to this music. And you mentioned the big bands that I grew up with, Tower of Power in Chicago and Blood, Sweat, and Tears. I grew up loving and adoring all of that, the combination of the horns and the rockin' bands. And I feel like it's something that if I could preserve it a little bit, which is why I even wrote the album in the style that I did. I do want to try to keep this music alive and introduce it to a whole nother generation of people.
Right. And we appreciate that because
thank you.
It is it is a dying art, the soulful sounds,
Yes, it is.
And I don't want it to go anywhere. And I'm glad.
Well, thank you for your support. I mean, without you guys, we couldn't do it. I mean, nobody would be hearing it. So, I mean, it's a mutual admiration society between the two of us. I appreciate you guys.
Now, when you guys recorded this, are you all in a room together, or did you guys
the
quarantine style like some of these other bands? Or
it's such a big group and you have to remember too, it was at the end of COVID.
Right.
Basically, we did take the rhythm section into the studio all together, and we laid down all basic tracks with the rhythm section. Vocals were done after the fact. All the horn parts were done after the fact. But everybody did play everything live. And, on the record, what you hear is what you get. I mean, there's very little in the way of altered, music, whether it's, computer generated. I mean, there's no computer generated music. But I mean, just like it's not super edited. It's basically the band live.
Which is what we look for in the music that we like to play, is that authenticity. When you guys are
right.
authentic when you play, and I think that shows in the songs and stuff, because a lot of bands are, they do so many things that when you hear them live, it's like, is that the same band playing?
Well, you know what? Don't I hear you? And we did run into that. And I mean, to the point where we purposely went out and shot a live video, which, if
Right.
anybody's on our website, which is www.thehollywoodallstars.net, we're a net website. It's on YouTube, it's everywhere. But if you search the Hollywood All Stars Living in America Live,
Oh yeah.
we were doing a theater in Fairfield, Connecticut, and we purposely said we need to shoot a live video because people are asking me all the time, what does the band sound like live?
Right. And
Well,
I'll tell you what, I watched that video and it sounds just like the EP.
well, Craig, that's what the band sounds like
Yeah.
live. And you know, it's
There's no difference.
no, and it's funny, that particular song, there's kind of a short story I'd love to tell you about how that became part of the album. I mean, obviously, our intention was not to do a record of cover songs. I wrote everything. But that one particular song, as I was posting some of our stuff on social media, this gentleman contacted me, and I don't know if you'll know him by name. His name is Charlie Midnight. Charlie Midnight is an incredible, legendary songwriter, record producer, and actually wrote with Dan Hartman, Living in America, for James Brown. He was a songwriter and said, you know, are you guys going to do any cover songs on the record? And I said, well, I hadn't really thought to. Why? And he said, well, you know, you guys are great. It reminds me of like a big James Brown rock and horn band. You know, go and listen to Living in America, which I did. So I go to our next rehearsal and I'm talking to everybody. And I said, you know, I got a phone call from Charlie Midnight and he was mentioning Living in America. And the horn section turns to me and says, Steve, we played on that record. That's us.
Yeah.
So, Craig, it was sort of this kismet moment where I said, you know what? All the stars were aligning. And I said, well, we have to do Living. So that's how Living in America got cut on the record. But the rest of the songs are all originals.
Okay, well that's great. That song is awesome, and I'm going to tell everybody listening, go check out. You look up their website, HollywoodAllstars.net.
.net. Yeah, yeah. And like I said, we're on YouTube, we're everywhere. But I mean, that particular video is one that we had done shot live. So because again, I was kept running into, well, the record's great, but you know, what do you sound like live? So
Right.
I owed it to everyone that was at least generous enough to go out and buy the record
Yeah.
to, you know, say, listen, here it is live. And you know, a lot of people have been drawn to the band because of that video.
Right. Yeah, you got to show proof of concept once in a while.
Yes, you do.
Well, Steve, I appreciate you hanging out with us.
Craig, listen, you know,
Yeah.
I want to tell you again, and I hate to keep stepping all over you, but I can't thank you enough. I mean, you guys are very generous with your time and your spirit. And without you guys and, you know, radio and everything else, we really would have nowhere to turn. So it's much appreciated from the band and I.
We appreciate you guys making cool music for us to play.
Well, thank you.
All we are is the people who put the music out for you. You guys are the ones doing all the work.
Well, I want to make you proud when you play this song. So thank you.
Well, thank you.